Okay. Well, welcome to James Moran's presentation on Through the Lens, Addressing Sexual Assault from the LGBTQIA plus perspective. My name is Antoinette Redmond, and I have the pleasure of introducing James. I am so excited for his session to gain some more insight and also learn some tips and tools on how we can better support people that have been assaulted and also support our LGBTQIA plus community. So I would love to turn it over to James.
Thank you so much, Antoinette, and thanks y'all for coming today. I was joking around earlier with our hosts that I've unfortunately got some construction going on around my house. So you might hear some of those noises, and I've got some dogs that look like horses, so they might get kind of upset about it too. So I apologize ahead of time. I promise they're good dogs. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen, if I can at least find the right window here. There we go, get into present mode. So I also lost my formatting this morning, so it's just been a comedy of errors. So it's not as pretty as it used to be, but I promise all the information is there. As was mentioned, our title today is Through the Lens, Addressing Sexual Assault through the LGBTQIA plus perspective. I work for the Kansas City Anti-Violence Project. Our mission statement, we provide dedicated services to LGBTQ youth and adults throughout Missouri and Kansas statewide who've experienced trauma, violence, harassment, or neglect. Through direct advocacy, professional training, and community education, we work to prevent and respond to domestic violence, sexual violence, and hate crimes. That's a really big mission, but somebody's got to do it. We're the only LGBTQ specific DVSA agency in a 4-state region. So not just Missouri and Kansas, but Iowa and Nebraska as well. That's not to say that there isn't brilliant grassroots organizing going on across our states within our community, but in terms of like the federal funding and all that nice stuff, we're the only folks on the board. A little snapshot of what we do. We provide immediate crisis intervention, case management, and advocacy to anybody in the LGBTQ community in our area. Our advocates are prepared to respond to, a crisis that's happening immediately or, something that happened 5 months ago, 5 years ago. And we try to keep our services as broad as possible. When it comes to case management, we like to use the word empowerment a lot. So whether there's barriers in one area of a survivor's life or 3 areas, we want to show them the safe ways that they can take care of those for themselves. We are about to reopen our counseling services and therapy. So I believe our budget was for up to 10 free sessions per client. We've got a staff full of social workers, all trained to provide therapy. And considering the history of our community and the mental health kind of, system, it's a little bit adversarial. So the process of vetting a provider sometimes takes more energy than it's worth, right? But we take care of all the vetting on behalf of our clients in that regard. When it comes to emergency assistance and housing, that's kind of the bulk of what our advocates do. There are 50 some shelters in our immediate area, whether they be domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, what have you. We can reliably call on maybe 4 or 5 to competently house LGBTQ folk just because of the lack of skills when it comes to affirming and supporting our community in those contexts. The incident documentation that we do, of course, if someone experiences violence, it is 1000% their decision if they want to go to law enforcement. We're never gonna, suggest that to someone if they don't want to do it. But we do at least encourage folks to document the incident that brought them to us with us for a couple of reasons. One, if they change their mind or need to go through law enforcement at a later date, we find this a lot with insurance claims for property damage. We've got that documentation as close to when it happened, but then also national statistics. They're scant when it comes to violence against LGBTQ folks, especially these forms of violence. So we submit our aggregate anonymized data to our national coalition, and they put out a report every year, every couple of years, depending on the subject matter. The support groups that we've offered in the past have kind of waxed and waned depending on the needs of the community. Our strongest recently was our trans people of color support group. That was something that arose after the local murder of a trans woman of color. The community came to us and said, we need a safe place to, mourn, to support each other, to, uplift each other. And thus the group was born. It went strong until our little cohort, I call it, they graduated, right? They found that it wasn't as critical to come to our space, every week as it was in the beginning. Really proud of that group. It's a wonderful example of our programming. The youth workshops we do have been through our drop-in center passages, which has been in hiatus since the pandemic started. We have tried to shift it online, but we found that especially when it comes to LGBTQ youth who can't be out in the home, the ability to log on to a Zoom with a bunch of other queer kids isn't the safest option at home. So we're really looking forward to when we can safely resume those in person. The training and technical assistance is what we're doing right now. I'll go to any organization, company, hospital, classroom, organization that wants to learn more about our community and how to support us and provide trainings like this. The technical assistance is kind of like the training on speed, right? It's looking into the policies, practices, paperwork, the physical spaces, trying to figure out how we can make it the most affirming that we can for the LGBTQ community. And then finally, outreach events and community collaborations. It's important that we reach not only the folks who might utilize our services, but other providers as well. We have a great partner in KU because so much of what we do as kind of a bridge organization is making sure that we're connecting LGBTQ survivors to resources that are actually going to help and not hurt. So we try to do outreach in kind of both of those areas. So that's a quick snapshot of what we do. If I could talk about this for an hour, I could fill all the time, I promise, but I won't. I start every one of my presentations with this slide talking about the importance of language, because language is really important to especially our jobs as helpers, right? Whether you're in a physician role or a supportive role or an administrative role, right? We have to be able to communicate well. In so doing, we have to keep in mind a few things. First, language is neither universal nor static. It's not the same for everyone, and it's always changing, right? That means we have to really keep up with how people are speaking, not necessarily using all the slang. I'm really bad at that. I sound ridiculous. But in terms of how we're talking about identities, how we're using language like person first language, patient first language. Those are the kinds of things we want to be aware of. And it's important because of how we use communication, especially in helper roles. We use our language to establish trust, to establish how we communicate with each other. Of course, we need to keep in mind that different terms mean things to different people. A lot of that has to do with how old we are, where we grew up, where we are now, kind of the folks we grew up around. An example I give, when I do these in person, I've usually got a bottle of Diet Pepsi in my hand. It's my thing. It's my drink, right? And in Kansas City, of course, we call it pop, but on the East Coast, it's soda. And in Atlanta, even if it has the Pepsi logo on it, it's going to be called a Coke, right? We have the skills to do these translations in our head. I have a crazy idea. Bear with me here. What if instead of using these skills to describe fizzy beverages, we use these skills with people? It's crazy, it just might work, right? Of course, we need to keep in mind as well that some terms are being reclaimed and used within communities, but they're just not appropriate for everybody, and them's the rules, and we got to be okay with it. So when it comes to sexual assault, here's how we define it at KCABP. Any sexual contact made without a person's consent or permission, period, full stop, the end, right? So often when it comes to sexual assault, we've got that certain narrative that we kind of assume is like the progression or certain behaviors or actions that may have taken place. The media doesn't help, kind of like legal definitions don't help with our understanding there. But what we do at KCABP is we want to create these definitions as broad as possible, because if our lives don't necessarily fit into that controlling narrative of what is sexual assault, how are we going to be able to name our experience as such? How are we going to be able to frame our experience in that lens and then use that lens to see what sources of support are available. You know what I mean? We can't solve a problem unless we can name it. And being able to recognize that our experiences with sexual assault as LGBTQ people is just as valid and worthy of support as, the general population. It does a lot. When it comes to kind of unique experiences of sexual assault within the LGBTQ community, the number one I always list is sexual assault used as a hate crime. We see this in a lot of forms. It just seems to add an extra layer of cruelty. Some kind of motivations that we've seen historically, men trying to change, an LGBTQ woman into a straight woman. It doesn't work. Some folks use the term corrective rape to describe this practice, which just kind of like makes me go like this appropriately, right? But the point is, it doesn't matter how pure you believe your intentions to be. I think that's my dog's, sorry. It doesn't matter how pure you believe your intentions to be, it's still sexual assault. I'm gonna take a moment and take care of these dogs. Hold on, folks, I apologize.
And as a reminder, people, we'll have about 10 minutes in the end to ask James any questions regarding his presentation or how we can join join an organization that he's talking about.
My apologies. I knew it would happen today. Another example we've seen of motivations, we've seen men forcing a man, specifically an LGBTQ, a gay, bisexual, or trans man, to have sex to exert power, right? Send a message. That's kind of the definition of a hate crime, right? Targeting one people or group of people because of your bias against the group they represent. And then finally, we see trans victims assaulted when they're outed as trans. That's happened locally with the violence against trans women in our community. If anybody remembers that old movie, Boys Don't Cry, I think it's like 99, Hilary Swank. It's based on the true story of Brandon Tina, who was a transgender man living in Nebraska. He was living stealth. We'll get into vocab later too. He was living stealth, meaning he wasn't disclosing to anybody that he was born assigned female. Some guys in his town found out and they beat him up, raped him, and left him on the side of the road. So when it comes to sexual assault within the LGBTQ community, its prevalence in hate crimes against us is definitely notable and unique. We also know that sexual assault between women and men who experience sexual assault are often not taken as seriously, even by the folks that we go to for help. I mean, our clients have relayed stories of, but you're gay, don't you guys like that? Comments like that, like really gross stuff. That also does the work of increasing the fear and hesitancy on the part of our community to report because of that fear, of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, of being re-victimized by the folks that we've gone to for help, right? It keeps people from seeking out healthcare. This is especially true when it comes to trans folk in the medical setting. And that's kind of what I've themed our discussion on today. Go ahead and sometime right now, I can't see your faces, or another time, go ahead and do a search for hashtag trans health fail. It's not so trendy on Twitter anymore, how language evolves, but you'll still find some examples on a few websites of kind of this phenomenon, right? Trans health fail, failures of the healthcare system to support trans patients. Some reminders that I kind of want to cover as reflected by the common themes in the stories that are told with this hashtag is that trans healthcare is more than just hormones and surgery, right? We've got entire bodies to take care of. Hormones, surgery, other ways we change our bodies to reflect our identities. They are some of the concerns that we have, but they're not relevant to every visit. We've got this cute little phrase. It's called trans broken arm syndrome. I don't know if anybody's heard it before. But it describes the phenomenon in which a trans person might go to, a healthcare provider with a benign injury or illness, maybe a broken arm in the emergency department, right? But before we can get, an x-ray, before we can get, any painkillers for, this terrible pain in my arm, we got to talk to psych, right? Make sure we're not crazy. Oh, you were climbing a tree. It's because you're trans and you must have mental health issues, right? Or, examples of, well, your bone must have broken because they're all brittle from these hormones you're taking without any sort of medical evidence to back it up. Practices like that is kind of more of what I'm talking about in terms of contributions to hesitancy to seek out healthcare. Kind of focusing all of our medical inquiries on our transness is not going to do much to foster that trust and communication that we use our language for in the first place. It does the work of reducing us to sensationalized stereotypes. Every trans person wants a sex change operation, right? And that's the number one thing we want all the time. That's not true. It tells us that you aren't well informed about us or our needs, especially when it comes to how our any medical interventions might affect our overall health. And just the implication that every problem we have must be rooted in our trans identities, right? That our transness in general poses a problem to our overall health. And that's not true. There's lots of really healthy trans people out there. Some examples of disparate care. These are examples from my own life, from the lives of folks that have used the hashtag, right? From things that we've heard from our clients. We've seen a lot of outright refusal of services. Just, I don't know how to treat transgenders, right? That's unethical to me. I don't know about the Hippocratic Oath, y'all, but that seems just not in line with the medical profession, right? Insurance denials, this one's really interesting. When it comes to what changes have we made to our bodies, how do we want our identities reflected in our official documents, our vital docs, right? So if we maintain the sex we are assigned at birth on our insurance records, that could mean no coverage for gender affirming care. And that's an example. Hormones, surgery to contour our chests, things like that. But on the flip side, if we change the sex on the record with the insurance company, that means denial of other care. So someone who changes their vital documents to reflect a new male identity, probably not going to have their pap smears covered by insurance anymore. And that's a cancer risk, right? Same when you consider folks who update their records to indicate female, right? They're probably not going to have their prostate screenings covered anymore. There's really no great way to navigate insurance as a trans person when it comes to exclusions based on sex. We've also seen inaccurate information put into charts. So folks, trans women of color being classified as men who sleep with men. I don't know why that seems to happen more to trans women of color than white trans women. We also see kind of like relationship changes, right? So a couple that we spoke to was seeking fertility treatments because the husband was a trans man. He couldn't produce sperm, right? So they were going into a reproductive doctor in order to get some help with that, IUI. And it wasn't until probably, I think she said months into the procedure, that the wife in this couple realized that she's been listed as single on all the paperwork. They have a legal marriage, but because he was trans, their marriage must not be legal. So she's single in the charts, and that's different, right? It indicates a lot of, I guess, follow-up care instructions, right? Being able to know whether or not there's someone in the home, et cetera. We see a lot of patients teaching their doctors about their own care, which is just perverse to me. Like, even those physicians will say, I don't have a lot of experience with this, shouldn't be putting the burden of doing that research onto the patient themselves, right? If this is something that's not familiar to you, it's your responsibility as a professional to continue your education so that you're prepared for what walks through your doors. Also, I don't pay all that money to do all the doctoring myself, right? Dismissal using language inappropriately. In this example, the doctor said, I don't know how to treat transgenders, but I think you can find that online. We don't use transgender as a noun anymore. That's not cool. Transgender is an adjective, right? So we would say a transgender man or a trans man, trans woman, transgender woman, but the plural is transgender people or trans people. We also see lots of invalidation just in trying to be nice. We can make a lot of mistakes. So in this example, the nurse said, "So when was your last period?" as part of the exam. And the patient, who was a trans woman, said, "Never, I'm transgender. She doesn't have a uterus," right? And the nurse, trying to be nice, says, "Oh, you really fooled me. I thought you were a woman." Nah, man. No, that's not how you do it. That patient is a woman, right? Trans women are women, trans men are men, period, full stop. When it comes to how things are looking today, we've got a lot of anti-trans legislation coming out. There's 28 states that are voting on this kind of legislation. And the three most prominent kind of realms in which this is being legislated is school curriculum, sports, and healthcare. When it comes to the sports thing, I know I'm not sitting here talking to a bunch of basketball coaches, but when it comes to what your patients are experiencing, it's really good to know where they have support. And it's looking like in sports and at school, trans youth are not getting the same kind of support that we should hope for. When it comes to denial of athletic opportunities, if you're not familiar, there are a bunch of states who are trying, including Missouri, who are trying to make it illegal for trans girls, so girls who are born assigned male and then identify as girls, right, from participating on girls' sports teams. So not only is that unequal and discriminatory at jump, but it is bound to have deleterious effects on mental health. Youth sports are a great way for kids to get their, first of all, get their energy out. I have two 5-year-olds. If they didn't play soccer, oh my God. But also a means of connecting with one's peers, right? And being the only group of folks who aren't allowed to participate does a lot of othering, and that just sets folks up for victimization. And at the end of the day, it means that young athletes are going to have to choose between playing sports or living authentically, and that's a hell of a choice. We don't want to put kids through that, I should hope. But we need to know, especially as helpers, that kind of this avenue of support for these young people is being taken away, or their legislators are voting on taking it away. When it comes to healthcare laws, we're having a few states that are trying to make it illegal to provide gender affirming care to folks under 18. I think one state has it up to like 24, which is ridiculous. And the kind of effects, the intended effects on that are to limit the number of kids that are taking puberty blockers, that are being supported in the home, that are going to supportive healthcare or mental health care rather. The penalties are in the criminal realm, which I just think is outrageous and certainly sends the message, right? It's not just physicians and doctors, but parents as well could face criminal charges for supporting their trans youth, for saying, "You're okay for being trans, I will call you that new name and call you by those new pronouns." That means, I mean, the implications are huge, right? So not only in the home are parents going to be de-incentivized from supporting their children, but it also means that doctors aren't going to want to help. This is critical. This is like DEFCON, whatever the worst number is. I'm worried, right? And I hope that y'all as medical professionals recognize your role in being able to fight back against these things. I'm not trying to tell you what political opinion to have, but in terms of those of us who want to support trans youth, this is not the way to do it. We've also seen in these laws the legalization of just plain old denial of care. So those bad experiences that trans folk have been having already are going to be completely legal, on the grounds of religious or moral objections. Again, that's a single class of people that it's going to be okay to deny healthcare to, and that's just not okay. When it comes to locally, there are a couple of bills in Kansas that kind of qualify as on that list. So that's prohibitions on gender affirming care, and then the trans sports ban in schools. In Missouri, we see the same thing. Banning doctors from treating trans youth with either hormone therapy or puberty blockers, and then sports prohibitions as well. I mention these because of their implications when it comes to denying access to gender affirming care, especially for youth. We see increased isolation of those kids. I mean, it's a scary landscape. You don't want to admit to anybody, you don't have to, that you're part of a group that it's okay to discriminate against. Increased levels of anxiety, depression, suicidality. I mean, 10 years ago, I work in acronyms, so I'm trying to spell it out, but GLSEN, they're the Gay and Lesbian Students Education Network. They do a lot in schools. They and the CDC, their studies showed that up to 1 in 3 LGBTQ youth had attempted suicide. These are children, right? And we're making the situation worse. These legal changes will also mean that LGBTQ folks will have their care delayed or denied. Because clinicians will be able to refuse to provide care. And as a result, we're probably going to put off healthcare as much as possible. Something that might have been bothersome enough to warrant a visit to, the local clinic before. I might not want to go to that clinic unless I absolutely have to. So what was just a little bit bothersome in the previous scenario is now going to be that much more likely to be really dangerous because I've left it alone for all this time. Also, we're going to see that less experience with LGBTQ patients is going to mean quality will decline in that care, and it's going to be a self-perpetuating cycle. So now that we've talked about the grim stuff, let's talk about what we can do, right? Let's do some best practices here. First and foremost, just be nice, right? We've got a lot of crap we got to face. Having one person who's nice and doesn't treat us like we're the least convenient thing to come across their path today is going to do a lot. When it comes to what do LGBTQ patients look for, I'm looking for empathy, right? I'm looking for open-mindedness, and I'm looking not to be judged. No one's asking you to change your beliefs or your values or your religion or your vote or anything like that, but you do have a sworn obligation as one, your specific profession, but also just as people who are in the helping profession to provide the best care and service to the patients who come through your facility, right? If something is unclear or unfamiliar, and I'm sure it will be, I mean, I'm 33 and I have to brush up on my vocab all the time, ask for clarification nicely, right? Of course, we want to do that only if it's relevant. Curiosity does not a medical necessity make. Just because you want to know doesn't mean that you should ask. Some ways that we can kind of kindly ask that question, phrases like, could you explain that a bit for me, right? Questions like, what does that mean to you? I love what does that mean to you, right? It does so much work in just that one little question. One, it conveys that I know I'm not an expert on everything and I'm not going to make any assumptions about your life, right? Two, it allows the patient to define themselves, right? Instead of relying on, a phrase or a label or an identity that might carry a lot of inaccuracies for them. And also it individualizes it, right? We're not asking anybody to speak for an entire group. We're asking, what does that mean to you? So I really like that question when it comes to unfamiliar stuff. We also want to make sure that we're creating a welcoming environment. If there's ever a genetic component to being part of the LGBTQ community, it's our skill, right, to read spaces like that. To walk into a new place and within probably 10 seconds flat, we're going to know immediately how safe we are, how open we can be, right, how honest and authentic we can be, and how dangerous it would be if we weren't, ways we can do this is visually, right? Posters, brochures, if as much as it's in your control, if you've got that rack of local resources, make sure that there's resources, about LGBTQ health specifically, about HIV and AIDS organizations, about service providers like KCAVP, right, that cater to the LGBTQ community. Even if the brochures for the local food delivery services, just has like some gay people on it, right? Like seeing ourselves reflected in the space we're entering is a great way to make us feel safe, welcome, and considered. When it comes to forms and paperwork, gender neutral is best whenever possible. I know this isn't always in our control. But where we can, we want to allow space for a non-legal name, right? For a non-legal sex, for maybe just our pronouns, right? Whereas, on some forms, we might have 2 check boxes next to the question about sex, one for male, one for female. Maybe we can have like an open answer for that, right? People who have traditional understandings of sex are just going to write in the traditional answers. But those of us with different experiences are going to be able to put our experience in that space where there wasn't room for it before. When it comes to questions that we ask, we want to watch our phrasing, right? Marital status gets kind of laden with other implications, but relationship status does a lot better work. Where it comes to, like, if we're doing like an interview with a patient, right, and we're asking about sexual history, like maybe we don't like start out with boyfriend, right? Maybe we start with partners, right? Date mate. I like that one, it rhymes. I know electronic medical records aren't that flexible, but it's worth it to find ways to make sure that we can pass along our patients' information, including all of this, right? Including what they want to be called, including, the pronouns that they use. Let's go back to Post-its. I don't care. I know it's hard, but it's worth it. Let's find those ways. And then our existing practices can always use a little revamp when it comes to our language too. So instead of, mom and dad, maybe say parents, right? Or trusted adult, legal guardian. Instead of, oh yeah, the men's room is down the hall on the right, we can say the restrooms are down the hall on either side. Just these little tiny practices are going to do tremendous work, because not only do they now include folks whose identities may not have been covered when we used our old language, but it also shows that we're taking the time and effort to make those little changes to ensure folks feel safe and supported. So like, it's a double whammy of support. I love it. It's super easy. When it comes to being an ally in general, not just like in your workplace, we want to make sure that we're not putting any blinders on ourselves, right? Just because we may be part of the community doesn't mean we shouldn't examine and reflect on how we're treating our peers, right? Our community is not a monolith. We're always growing, changing, evolving. So we want to make sure that we're not giving ourselves a free pass to not stay up on things. When it comes to treating LGBTQ patients and sexual assault survivors independently and where those groups overlap, we always want to start with believing them, right? When I was first getting trained as an advocate, my trainer told me there are 3 things we can say to a sexual assault survivor to immediately establish rapport. 1, I believe you. 2, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And 3, no one deserves to be treated like that. These phrases are powerful, right? In a situation where someone may not have had control over their lives, we're telling them, in this instance, when you took control, you made a good decision, right? You are capable of this. It's tremendous. And that's how we have to start every time. Trust equals rapport. Simple as that. When it comes to believing them, it's not just a matter of, not contradicting someone or poking holes in their story, but as a rule, our community is pretty sick of hearing, "Are you sure?" Yeah, I'm sure. That's why I said those things, right? It's dismissive of our identities and our experiences, and it will plummet that trust quotient way down. We need to remember that every patient has the right to come out to others. When we're writing those Post-its, so, the folks on the next shift, let's check with that patient and make sure that they don't want to be the one to introduce themselves to the next folks on shift. As far as I'm concerned, let's treat an identity like an LGBTQ identity as if it's HIPAA protected, because that information in the wrong hands can be dangerous to people, right? A few slides ago, trans folk are sexually assaulted when they're outed as trans. If the wrong person finds out, it could put somebody's life in danger. Even if the person that I'm talking to, in this public space is totally cool, kind, considerate, friendly, that doesn't mean that I'm not worried in the back of my head that when I'm walking to my car by myself, they're not going to be following me and intending to hurt me, right? This is serious stuff. We got to protect that as much as possible. When it comes to how do we interact with LGBTQ and trans patients, mirroring their language is a great tool to use. I'm sure y'all learned that already. But when it comes to that patient's identity, the name they use, the pronouns they use, how they name their body parts, these are all important things. If someone, when they're doing their first interview with you is talking about how, hi, I'm Sam and I'm a gay clown, like, I really hope that you wouldn't write like homosexual jester in your notes, right? We want to use the exact language they use. One, it conveys that the patient has the expertise in their own life, which is really important. And also it means that we're not telling anybody that we know better than them, right? Your language is good enough. I don't think that I know the proper way to say that. It works to kind of break down the us versus them wall that so often is between marginalized groups and service providers. When it comes to body parts, that's super important when it comes to trans folk. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that trans people relate to their bodies, right? Some people prefer to use very clinical names for their parts, and that's cool. Some folks like to use really crazy euphemisms, and that's cool too. I hope that we as providers can reflect that language back, even if on the chart we need to make a distinction, right? I would give examples, but everything would sound silly, right? Even where we have to use, legitimate professional language, I hope that we can notate somewhere how this patient refers to those body parts. We want to avoid any assumptions that we can about sexual orientation and gender identity. It's really hard. I mean, I have the best gaydar this side of the Mississippi, and I have to stop myself, right? We don't know anything about a patient until they tell us. Avoiding assumptions is going to do a lot of good when it comes to figuring out, I'm talking primarily about histories, about experiences, right? We may not assume that someone who is like the flamiest flame who ever flamed would have any experience sleeping with women, right? But excluding that experience from that person's life is going to also exclude, diagnostic tools as well. Of course, we're going to mess up, whether it comes to using the wrong language or saying the wrong thing, and that's okay, we're human. But the key is to apologize quickly and take that correction gracefully. We got to put our pride aside for the sake of the patients, for their safety, their well-being, and their trust. If I make a mistake in a group of people whereby I use the wrong pronouns for somebody, we call that misgendering. And instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, she, and moving on with my sentence, I instead go into this 10-minute diatribe about how, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that. I'm a supportive ally. I've got this, and like go on and on trying to make myself feel better. One, it's going to put a shining spotlight on that other person who probably just wanted that moment to go away. But also it's going to out them to everybody else in the vicinity, right? And like we said, that could be dangerous. So we want to make sure that if we want to correct a mistake in a way that is more than just showing further respect, that we're doing it for the sake of the other person and not for us. I talked about inclusive language before. We can find creative ways to take gender out of our language, and it does that double work, right? Not only including people, but showing folks that we care enough to include them. One word that I really don't like coming out, especially in medical settings, is real. We don't want to ask about a real name or a real sex, right? What's real is what they tell you. I think the information someone would be after if they use those words would be like legal information. So like, what's the name on your driver's license? What sex is on your birth certificate? That kind of thing. And that's fine. Trans folk, we know that the world isn't set up for us. We know that we're going to have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get the same kind of things that everybody else does. The difference is made in the people holding those hoops, right? If we're, coming down from registration into the emergency department, and we say like a preface, something like, I know it may be a pain in the butt, but I really need your legal information here. It's for our official, hospital records. I promise that no one's going to see it. That doesn't absolutely have to. And I see here on this note that we're going to call you Mary. So we're definitely going to keep calling you Mary. I just need this legal information, right? perhaps something a little bit more eloquent than the example I just gave. But, just kind of being honest and transparent about the reasons we need that information, and our recognition of the pain in the butt that kind of experience is going to go a long way. And then finally, we want to be advocates for our patients, right? When it comes to doing a handoff to another shift, another department, a provider, to law enforcement, we hold a lot of, you hold a lot of power as professionals in the medical field, right? Those of you who wear white coats, that's a powerful coat, right? You are recognized as an expert. Let's use that power to make sure that we're not sending folks off to be re-victimized again. Let's make sure that when our patient says, I don't want to deal with having to come out to another department, that we're capable to tell the patient, we can take care of that for you. And that we can respectfully make contact with that other department and say, hey, Mary's really concerned that she's going to be harassed or discriminated against, right? I rushed through that because I wanted to have enough time for questions. I tried to leave 15 minutes. I'm going to leave my info up there, but I'm also going to open up the chat to see what I missed. And otherwise, the floor is for y'all.
Thank you so much, James, for that. That was really, really great information. If anyone has a question for James, if you can kindly unmute and ask your question.
I also know it's the middle of a Monday, so like if you all want to like formulate your stuff and get back to me, obviously if there's something that we want to ask, maybe not in front of the class, that's absolutely fine too. Just drop me a line at that email address. I absolutely understand.
While people are thinking of their questions, I would like to uplift and reiterate one of the points that you made. And you said in particular, if someone comes to you and tells you they've been sexually assaulted, there's 3 things that you should say. 1, I believe you. 2, I'm sorry. And 3, no one deserves to be treated like this. So I just, again, want to reiterate that I believe you, I'm sorry, no one deserves to be treated like this, because oftentimes, in particular, people in healthcare, we want to fix things. So right. How, what, when, where, how, what was going on? Tell us all the details, instead of being in the moment and being present and really empathizing with what just took place. So I want to thank you for bringing that up and making that a very valid point for us to consider when someone has been assaulted. One of the questions that go ahead. Did you?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, it is interesting to kind of compare and contrast the different perspectives of kind of the different kinds of helper that a survivor of sexual assault might access, right? So we as advocates want to make sure that this person is, internally well, right? When it comes to mental, emotional stability, their sense of control and safety, right? And y'all are the physical fixers, right? So kind of the nature of those roles definitely influences how we approach our I guess means of care, right? And I think that's kind of reflected. So obviously not every one of these suggestions that I gave today is going to be literally feasible or in concert with any particular role in the medical field, but being able to keep these things in mind when it comes to kind of the face-to-face provision of care, I think is going to be helpful. So sorry to interrupt. Please continue with the question you were going to say.
No, that's great. And I think it goes beyond the healthcare scope, right? Of us just like you returning back to the point of humanity and seeing people as people, and not just boxing them into 2 binary categories, which we all know is extremely outdated. We do have a question.
Sure.
Sherry asked, if someone has experienced a sexual assault, who do they reach out to? And would they be connected with one of your therapists?
Sure. Thanks for that question. I just saw that the little chat icon was blinking, so thank you for catching that. When it comes to someone in the LGBTQ community, they can contact us via email at info, at kcavp.org. They can reach out on social media via Facebook or Twitter, I think are the ones that go to my boss. Keep in mind that the social media messages are accessible to all staff and not just one individual. And then also, we also did just get a new phone number. That's why I didn't put a phone number on the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and look that up one more time, just so we can be sure that I'm conveying the right number now. I'm just looking on my phone for a moment here. All right, so our main office line will be area code 816-388-0484, and I'm about to put that in the chat.
I beat you to it, James.
These dogs, they're gonna get a harsh talking to in a minute. Oh, thank you. The harmonies are just beautiful.
They are, you know, and any other time we'd want them to protect and to say something. So, you know, we can't pick and choose.
Well, I wish I could hear myself. I can't right now. But upon calling that number or sending that email, they will be connected to one of our social workers. Yes. I'm going to yell at a dog for a moment. I'll be right back because we still have about 10 minutes.
Sounds great. And just some housekeeping, the recordings will be available on kumc.edu/SAA. And there's also several other events that are going to be occurring this week that we would love for you to participate in. So by going to that website, you'll be able to see all the events that have been planned. So a huge shout out to Ellie and Morgan for leading this effort to bring more awareness to Sexual Assault Awareness Month. James, how can we support the Kansas City Anti-Violence Project?
Sure. Well, we're lucky in that right now we're going through a bit of a rebuilding phase. We just hired 3 new staff on. Our executive director is still in her first 90 days. So we're really happy, right? So we're really happy about kind of this kind of fresh new spin that we've got on things. That being said, I don't know the current state of our online donation portal. So if somebody wanted to contribute monetarily, you can try to look on our website, kcavp.org. But I, being so old that I cannot keep up with technology, do not know if that's accurately working. If you don't want to do, cash drop, you can also choose us as your Amazon Smile charity. If that's something that you do, you go to smile.amazon.com, and then a portion of your purchase will be donated to us. We've also got a little bit of space left to accept donations. We're really hoping that we can get just as many kind of health and wellness donations that we possibly can. Right now, we would be accepting deliveries by appointment. So if someone were to, visit the store and pick up an extra bottle of hand sanitizer, or maybe like an extra 10, we could arrange a pickup or delivery for that so that we could distribute that to the folks that we serve. So right now our how do we contribute options are going to be that the monetary donation, or there's the dog, the monetary donation, or the item donation. We are also working on revamping our volunteer program. That's something that has been on a brief pause to adjust for COVID and adjust for the kinds of events that we want to do. But information about when that is up and running again will be on our social media as well. So if we don't want to contribute with our wallet, but with our time, please keep an eye on our social media. It's just Kansas City Anti-Violence Project, or KCAVP, on the major platforms, and you should get informed of that as soon as it's updated.
Great. One of the other questions that I have is that you mentioned when, someone uses the wrong pronoun, and then they begin to center themselves in that. Can you walk us through what would be the appropriate response? Because I like to think that people don't intentionally want to harm or embarrass people, but oftentimes we, and I myself included, will default to he or she. So how can we better address when we make a mistake when using a pronoun?
Sure, that's a great question. Kind of always safe option is just to re-say your sentence with the same pronouns. So if I actually accidentally said she took her dog to the park, I might go, he took his dog to the park. Maybe make a facial expression that indicates I knew I made a mistake, but I'm issuing a correction. We could also try to avoid it all by just using a they and them for folks whose identities are unknown. This works especially well when we're talking about folks in the third person, maybe like between, doctors, or between, all the relationships y'all have in medical settings. The English teachers out there will tell you it's incorrect. I don't care. Like, I love grammar, I love writing, but no, that's not as important as making sure people feel included and safe. Yeah, I guess those would be my two tips when it comes to making the wrong choice in a sentence. I just restate that sentence with an indication that you knew you messed up. And also be prepared if the person who you're speaking to or about has a negative reaction as well. Maybe that's the 50th time that day someone's used the wrong pronouns and they are just sick of it, right? And we've all had things like that, when it happens over and over and over and over in our day. By the time the last one happens, we're ready to kick kittens through fans. So we have to allow for that kind of reaction. It's valid and it's okay. Again, kind of want to work on putting our pride aside and, reiterate, I understand and I'm sorry, and then continue if we get a negative reaction like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking such good questions. I'm suddenly realizing there's a whole lot I left out of this presentation.
It's a ever evolving topic, right?
Right.
Like there's never, we start out, we talk about this all the time, and about the alphabet soup and what's right, what's not. And, we're all just trying to learn and be more inclusive and also be responsive to how people should be perceived, whether they're a sexual assault survivor or whether they're just a part of the LGBTQIA plus community.
Right.
One of the things that I would like for you to reiterate that we have learned in regards to what you've been talking about, the several trans bills that have been either introduced or passed. What are some ways that we, as individuals, because we can't advocate on behalf of KU Medical Center, but as individuals, what are some of the ways that we can advocate for these children?
So I'm taking my professional hat off as well, and I'm putting my personal hat on. I'd say, contact the leaders, right? If there's a kind of outside of KU organization of folks in your profession, make sure that they know that this is an issue that they need to take up. If walking in the streets with a sign is your deal, do it. Right? I wish I could see these issues as, part of the national news coverage that we see every day. When legislation like the Equality Act was literally being voted on, that got major headlines. We saw widespread support from celebrities, from politicians, from folks in organizations that serve the same folks that we do, right? When it comes to, the MOXAs, the YWCAs, we saw that support, and then it left the news and no one's talking about it anymore. So I want to make sure that these conversations are happening all the time so that we don't forget how important it is. When it comes to in our everyday, for those patients that we know that we have who are in the community who have come out to us, make sure, say it outright. Like, I know there's a lot going on in the law these days, but know that we in this office are going to support you, right? That'll do the work of preventing as much further hesitancy to access healthcare that we might see creeping along with these new changes. So I guess to sum up, strengthen your personal connections with the folks in the community that you already have. And then as much as you can get around the rules of the land, do some activism if that's your jam. Get involved, whether it be with an organization like us when we have our volunteer program up, or, with, Kansas Doctors Association. I don't know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James, for joining us today. If you have any additional questions for James, as you see, you can email him at james@kcabp.org. Again, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and shedding light on this incredibly important topic. And we look forward to everyone joining us for the rest of the week of activities. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, y'all. I appreciate your attention, your questions, and please do reach out if you or someone you know needs anything.
Thank you.